How can we move from being reactive to taking a proactive approach to our health and well-being? I'm James Hewitt, and this is High Performance Talks, a show dedicated to finding inspirational ways to improve performance through better health and well-being. In each episode, you'll hear personal stories from high-performing individuals, ranging from top executives and entrepreneurs to world champion athletes and scientists. In this episode, I'll be talking to Doctor Eric Gerstel. Dr. Gerstel is a medical doctor, head of clinical services and care at Hirslanden Clinic in Geneva, Switzerland, and is also a member of Hintsa's Science Board. In this conversation, we talk about the importance of general health, a fundamental component in Hintsa's Circle of Better Life model, as well as longevity, performance, and behaviour change. Thank you very much for joining us today, Eric. To get us started, please can you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what inspired you to study medicine? We know you're a medical doctor.
Hi, James. I'm a doctor, and I was trained in Switzerland and in the US. And I did full training as internal medicine doctor and as well in the ICU. I then decided to pursue academic career and started to study epidemiology and do research in different fields, including prevention of disease. And I'm now working in a private clinic, and I am heading prevention unit where we do evaluate patients in their health, not only the ones who are sick, but also the people in good health. They would like to maintain this on the long term. And at the same time, I'm still connected to the university, pursuing some research activity, teaching activities as well in different fields, and in particular in the prevention field, medicine. And I'm, of course, part of this fantastic and fascinating program, Hintsa Performance, which gives us, for me at least, a possibility to work with team around the patient and offer him not only medication and treatment, but also much more than that, a complete and holistic approach.
And obviously we got to know each other through your role as a member of the Science Board at Hintsa. And also I'm aware that you studied epidemiology, but also internal medicine. And it seems that in particular internal medicine takes into account all aspects of a person. And I was wondering if you could speak to that, because in my personal experience, I was a full-time racing cyclist, as you know, and spent some time meeting with various doctors. And one of the things I always found that I'd come with a symptom, and they'd often try and address the symptom, but they would never really ask me about my sleep or anything else that was going on. Usually they'd just find a pill to try and fix it. But you've mentioned before this idea of taking into account all aspects of the person, integrating that information. Is that something you can speak to and maybe share some of your perspectives on that based on your training in internal medicine, but also based on your experience as well?
The patients tend to go to see the doctors when they are sick, when they don't feel well, they have the symptoms, and they it's a very traditional way of seeing medicine in Occidental society. Doctors are here to treat you when you are sick. It's very different in Asia or in China, for example, where you go to doctors to keep well. And so it's this approach. And the patients are not very, they're not ready to discuss other subjects that the key question they are concerned with, which could be pain or something like that. The doctors at the same time, they don't have much time to see the patient, and they would like to give the answer directly and find the diagnosis, help the patient, and they don't think it's the right opportunity to discuss other subjects. So naturally, most doctors, they don't have the time to focus on general other aspects of health. And you have other patients that will come to see the doctor saying, I'm in good health, I'm feeling well, but I'm going to see with you if there is a way to maintain this, and if I could improve my well-being. I think there's much things to be done, and I like to see what I can do for my future. And the doctors will then be open-minded, probably most of them minded to discuss that. They're not very well trained to do that. And then so it's an opportunity to create. So to create this opportunity could be a program like a Hintsa performance program, where the customer or the patient, they will come to the program because they have a problem. Most of the time they have a small medical issue or more severe medical issue, but they also want to be taken care of in a general way. And they have understood that it's important to do that. The same approach should be done with the doctors. They should understand that holistic approach and general approach is key, and they will help patient and population more if they were doing that more often.
I think it's an interesting development. I mean, certainly, I think I'm from the United Kingdom, and if I think about growing up, there's been a culture around health that if you went to the doctor and you didn't have any symptoms, then people would call you a hypochondriac. They'd say, why are you going to see a doctor if there's nothing wrong with you? And there's been a very reactive approach. But from what you're describing there, it seems like there are people coming now who are saying, I'm well, but I want to stay well and even get better. Is that a shift that you've seen in patients over the years, over the course of your career? Do you think people are now more proactive than they used to be?
Absolutely. There is a clear evolution in that aspect. We can see that through the media. There's much more said about the importance of well-being, of the way you eat, the effect of the environment, the importance of sport, and so internet also has brought a lot of information available to the patients. So they tend to get information before going to the doctors. They have their own opinion. So patient evolved a lot and has evolved a lot during the last few years. And so that's one of the aspect. And then there is an evolution of the society. More and more society put pressure on people. Challenges are higher. Of course, it includes sport activity, but also professional activity. In your job now, more and more people feel they are stressed and overwhelmed by the intensity and the pressure put on their shoulder. And there is a natural tendency for an acceleration trap, where the more you do, the more you have to do. And the sense is sometimes lost, and it affects their health. And so both aspects influence the patient in the way they approach their health, and they come to see the doctors more and more, asking to improve their well-being and their long-term health and their behavior more than treating a disease. So it's something that we really see clearly evolving.
So what type of cases do you typically find that you enjoy most or you find most rewarding?
I have to say that what I like the most now is when I practice medicine, is when I see a patient that is coming back after, let's say, 1 year, when I had the first meeting with him, and he is very happy, telling me that everything changed since our last meeting, and that it helping realizing he had to change his behavior, and that what we have done completely change his life, not only improve his health, but also his quality of life, his well-being, his relationship with other people, his job. He was able to make the right decision. And so that are not been only able to helping in terms of medicine and the choice of medication and the right diagnosis, but also to become more empowered and more in control of his own life and his decision. And so I think this is the best feeling and the best achievement that I think a doctor could see in his job. But of course, I like also to see a patient in the ICU and make the right choice of medication. And I think it's two very different situation. And I tend with the time more and more to prefer the first one.
It must have been interesting to see those extremes, as you say, from these kind of acute cases where you're in an ICU environment, intensive care unit, needing to save somebody's life, but then seeing these kind of more long-term changes in a more integrated way, in a more holistic way, you could say. But I can certainly resonate in a different way with the rewarding sense of seeing people's lives change locally. But if you think about the global context of the medical profession, do you feel hopeful that the medical profession has been successful in tackling these big epidemics that are compromising so many people's lives in more of a chronic context? Things like obesity, cardiovascular disease, heart attack, stroke, metabolic disease. These are increasingly some of the leading causes of death in the developed world, or certainly shortened life. Is the medical professional being successful? Are we seeing positive changes in the right direction in those areas?
I don't think so, unfortunately. You make a right point here. I think, in fact, we see that our society is not evolving the right way in general. If you just take obesity, overweight, for example, in Europe, you have about 50% of the population who is overweight, and close to 30% which is obese. It's a large amount of people, and these numbers are just growing very fast, and probably in less than 20 years you will have half the population of Europe will be obese. So we know that obesity is the biggest killer, one of the biggest killer in our society, more than any other cause of disease, and doctors doesn't seem to be able to control and to do much about it. I'm a bit tough with doctors, but it's just a fact. And doctors are not, of course, the only cause of this progression, and they cannot be responsible for this evolution, but their impact is not focusing enough in these questions. Doctors still focus their energy treating advanced disease or treating the eldest, acute care. I sometimes feel that our society is getting crazy. We spend more and more money on a procedure that does not help the patient. Most of our expenses are done at the end of life, a few months before a patient dies, and even there is no much hope for this patient. And so there's a big question about why don't we have energy and money on prevention. I think the doctors are not going the right way in this aspect. We know that health and early death is much influenced by the way you behave, and much less by what the doctors suggest and what, for example, genetics will predict for you. So the number one cause of problems and health issue is related to our behavior, and mainly obesity and smoking. And so the doctor is not very efficient in this aspect.
Well, I've heard some startling statistics about the surprisingly few number of people who actually change their behaviour even following a diagnosis of a chronic disease. It seems like even that kind of terrible news doesn't seem to motivate people to change in a consistent and meaningful way. But how much training in your experience, do doctors actually have in promoting behaviour change with patients?
You are absolutely right. If you just take the example of smoking, we know that half the people who smoke will die from smoking, because have an early death because of that. We also know that most people who smoke like to stop smoking. So it's the large majority of them, but only 6% or less are able to do so in the long term. So the will is most of the time here, the cause are known, but the ability to change and to really make the decision for patient is very complicated and not easy at all. Doctors not well trained in this aspect, helping the patient. Some of them have a big interest in this, and they get a training for that. You have a very few number of them who get trained in helping smoking cessation, or in the question of food habit and education. But it's a minority of doctors that train in this field and that really focus on this aspect. I think the solution would be at a larger scope, on maybe nurses or educator or program like the Hintsa program that could influence patient decision and the decision process. And I think the question of being in control of your life and your own decision is a key factor in here. If you want to make this change, if you want the patient to change, you have to help him getting in control and be able to make his decision and to go in the direction he decided. And it's very much related to psychological aspect. It's very much related to personal experience. But I think it's where we have to focus now. The patient needs to be taken care as a whole, and not only by one single person, and not only by one specialty. And doctors working with psychologists, with mentor, with coach, as well as education nurse, as well as specialist, as a team, aiming at the same goal, which is improvement of well-being and health, is the solution for sure. This model should be spread. Of course, you might not have enough specialists available, so a program like Hintsa program could be one of the solutions.
One of the things I'm very passionate about personally, as a company at Hintsa, we're very passionate about. I know that you are passionate about as well. Is helping people to realise more of their potential, to become more of who they could be in terms of health, in terms of well-being, performance as a byproduct of that. But often in a coaching process, sometimes I think we come up against people's very fixed beliefs about themselves. That they maybe have a fatalistic approach to their health and well-being, that they think maybe because someone else in their family experienced something that they inevitably will as well. How much of a role do you think bad luck plays in the likelihood of developing a disease relative to changes in decisions that you can make to reduce that likelihood?
I think that people who believe it's too late and there is nothing to be done are absolutely not true. We know that any change, even small changes, can have very high power in your health and in your future. And you can just take an example. If you have a patient with lung cancer who decide at the diagnosis to stop smoking, we know now that this prognosis is much better than if he's maintaining his smoking. So a small decision at the right time, even very late, because you take a cancer patient, it could be considered as there's no point stopping smoking because it's too late. In fact, it has already an impact even at its latest stage. So any time, any change can make a difference, and a small change can make a big difference. There have been these studies that have been published recently about exercising. We know how important it is to exercise in your life to improve your health, and we have studies that show that just a small exercise, a few minutes per day, can already see a big difference among patients. I've conducted a study among nurses who were taking care on patient, home care patient, and we started educating half of them, and we provide them with bikes to go to work instead of taking their own car. And after a few months, we already observed big changes in lab results about cholesterol. We observe a change in blood pressure in a small group with a very, very tiny change of habits and education. So it's we have the possibility to change health very quickly and very efficiently at any stage with a change in behavior.
And I think it's amazing to see the effects that these small changes can have. And certainly it seems like there's this fantastic relationship between longevity and exercise. And we're hearing increasing reports, and there's some quite interesting studies about the association between fitness and longevity, but also muscle mass and strength and longevity. I read quite an interesting study recently where they introduced a strength training program into a nursing home. And actually, people in the study were all over 90 years old. And even at 90 years old, these individuals were able to improve their strength and muscle mass. And the statistics would suggest that will have a measurable impact on their health, their well-being, and also their longevity. But increasingly, I think we're not just hoping to live a long time. We want to live well for a long time. And there's this idea of not just increasing lifespan, but increasing health span, the time that we're kind of free from disease. Do you think people's expectations are changing about the kind of life they want to live? Are people starting to think that they will be able to live healthier for a long time? Rather than have this kind of inexorable decline after the mid-40s, which maybe we thought we'd be doomed to in the past.
That's right. People are observing that we are getting older and older, and at the same time, they can see older and older patient able to practice sport and even compete. And so the idea is that when you get older, you cannot do anything anymore, and just the end of life is getting more and more away. Medicine will help us, but also behavior change in the future to become older and older, and hopefully able to keep a normal mind and a normal physical activity for the longest period as possible. You can see now people more than 70 years old running marathon and having an incredible high performance. And so this is not a fatality to not be able to move when you get older. And of course, you have disease like dementia that will affect you if you get touched by this disease. But we also know that behavior can reduce this risk. Obesity is a clear now factor to dementia, this factor, and sport activity reduce the risk of such complication and maintain good health, mental health, and physical health on the long term. And so people are more and more conscious about it, and their expectation is growing in this aspect. And you find more and more middle-aged men and women who decide to invest in their future and exercise more than before, have a healthier life at this particular period because they want to invest for the next 20, 30 years. And that's a common thing you can find now.
I think the flip side of this is that sometimes I've heard people be concerned that if they are engaged in vigorous physical activity later in life, that they might actually be harming themselves. And there's these kind of traditional kind of old messages that so people say, you don't want to push yourself too hard, and this idea that maybe we're more fragile as we get older, we should do something more gentle. But actually, what would you say to someone who had those concerns that they didn't want to push themselves physically as they got older? Is there a risk? And if there is a risk, what should they do about it?
I think that in general, sport and exercising is always a positive factor for your health and well-being at any age. But you have to understand that if you've not been exercising for a while, and if you've not been trained well, exercise can be dangerous. And you find a lot of people in their middle age, their 50s, and they used to be sporty. They used to run a marathon when they were 20s, around that time, and then not practicing for years and years, and they start over again at 50 years old. And so some of them, they don't understand it's not the same as before, and they have to practice and get the right training, and that their body is not the same as 20 or 30 years ago. So anything is achievable, but you need to have the right training and the right coach and the right program, and to avoid accident. We know that you have a higher risk of sudden death or even during any sport activity. So that's a fact. And we know that you have a higher risk of trauma and hurting yourself during exercising. But this could be highly and easily avoided if you have the right training. And so I really emphasize that to my patient and say, that's a very good decision. You may write. You are 50 years old, 60-year-old, you can start exercising. You can do a marathon. Is this possible? We need to have the right training and with the right person and for the right program to achieve this.
I think that's a great message, and I mean it's interesting because when I first started working with Hintsa, we obviously had our office in the Geneva clinic alongside you, and sometimes clients used to come and see us in this Swiss clinic, and Sometimes there is this kind of perception, there's an aura around Swiss clinics that people must be doing something kind of secret and sophisticated, and people imagine that maybe they'd turn up at the Hintsa clinic and be wired up to some kind of special machine, and they were almost disappointed sometimes when we'd say, actually, the secret is doing small things consistently well, and they hoped that we'd have a special serum, but actually often what we had was a recommendation to do some exercise. But in your opinion, what do you think are the main lifestyle factors that can be the life changes or the game changers for an individual?
Fortunately, doctors have the data now to answer these key questions. And in terms of behavioral change, we know from fact that eating better and exercising more, smoking less, gives you a few more years to live. And it's just fact. If you take smoking and smoking cessation, we know that people who smoke 1 pack per day, they will cut their life by the mean of 7 years. And eating better will help you also live longer. It is not as efficient as stopping smoking, but you will still gain a few months of life on the whole and on the mean. And exercising will be something in between. You will probably win a few years of life as well. So I would say that way, that if you are a non-smoker, if you stop smoking, that's a major factor to improve your health, of course. It's a very well-known factor now. If you can reduce, you don't need to stop, but you reduce your alcohol consumption. It's a key element as well on the long-term health. If you exercise regularly, that's also a major factor for good health. And so we know that eating well is also very important. Good food, enough fruit and vegetables and so on. There is a lot of data on that, but it is a secondary aspect compared to smoking cessation, alcohol consumption, and exercise practice. And I would add to these well-known factors is the culture of well-being. I think that being happy, having a good social network, very good relationship with your family, even something we never talk about is a good sexual activity. All these factors are important for your well-being, and adding all these factors make you not only live longer, but also have a better quality of life and avoid certain disease and symptoms. And so it's key to understand that changing behavior prolong your life, but also improve the quality of your life.
That's a great message. And you're right at the beginning, when we started speaking, you mentioned that in Chinese tradition, there's this idea that you go to your doctor to stay well. Whereas traditionally in Western medicine, we've only gone to the doctor when we were sick. And I think you've given us some really practical ideas that we could all use and apply to improve our health and our well-being, probably most importantly in a proactive way. But I was reminded when you were talking about China of a Chinese proverb, which could be a good place to close today. And it says that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. And that's something I'd like to leave with our listeners. And I hope that you've found some useful ideas that you can apply to improve your well-being and your performance as a byproduct of that. Thank you very much for your time, Eric.
That's perfect. Thank you very much.
You've been listening to High Performance Talks, brought to you by Hintsa Performance, the leading provider of human high performance coaching and digital wellbeing services. Thanks to today's guest, Dr. Eric Gerstel. You can find all the episodes of High Performance Talks in Hintsa's newsroom at hintsa.com/newsroom. That's HINTSA.com/newsroom. The full version of this interview is also available through our Better Life coaching service. The host of the show is me, James Hewitt. Our producer is Nora Janefelt. If you liked what you heard, please rate us and share this episode with your friends.